Hey everybody, and welcome to Washington State History. My name is Mr. Martin, and I'll be your host for about 7 to 8 minutes. I promise this time, not like I said last time where I said 8 minutes and then it ended up being like 14 minutes. This one's closer to 8. So, last time in the last lesson, we saw sort of why people came here, what drew some people here. You're going to see more of that today, but it's going to bring so many people that it's going to eventually lead to Washington becoming a state. So today is all about that. I'd like you to take Cornell notes on this particular lesson, and you're going to see sort of some of the basic headlines like people coming here, how there's this thing called industrialization and railroads. So tell me, like, basically take notes on all of these, and I want to know in the summary section of your Cornell notes, how do all of these lead to Washington becoming a state? Washington becoming a state needed a couple of things: people and reasons for people to come here. We saw in the previous video that the government was offering some incentive, some reasons for people to move here, namely free or almost free land. Land got some people here, but it was economic opportunity combined with a new invention that really got people to the new territory, both literally and figuratively. Essentially, the Industrial Revolution was a change in the way that things were produced and distributed. Products started being made and produced in large factories on a very large scale. Instead of craftspeople making things in shops or in their homes, goods were now being mass produced by lesser skilled workers. So instead of people being paid for what they produced, they were instead being paid for their labor. And you started seeing factories pop up all over the country, including throughout Washington State. In 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad was completed, connecting the eastern and western halves of the country. So in addition to industrial production increasing efficiency, we also see industrial distribution in the form of railroads, a super efficient way to transport goods across long distances. Metal wheels on metal rails create less friction, which means you can transport large amounts of good with very little energy. Think of it this way. Take this beefcake right here carrying this backpack. He could probably carry about 50 pounds over a long distance. Now, using that same energy that it took him to carry that 50-pound backpack, if he were to have a load on wheels, he could pull 500 pounds, 10 times more, because of the reduced friction of wheels on the road. Now, if he were to pull a load on metal rails with metal wheels, he could increase that by 10 times again and be able to pull 5,000 pounds because of the reduced friction of metal wheels on metal rails. Now, you put steam power behind that, and literally tons of weight can be pulled over great distances. A total change in getting goods to and from far-off places like Washington State. In addition to the more efficient and free movement of goods across the country, rails also allowed people to move more freely. Instead of taking months to get from one end of the country to the other, they could make the trip in just weeks, and for a lot less money. In fact, in the decade after the rail was complete in 1870, the population in Washington triples from 23,000 people to 73,000 people. Many of these people journeying out west had neckbeards. I mean, a lot of neckbeards. So much of Washington's history has neckbeards. Yesler? Neckbeard. Denny? Neckbeard. So many neckbeards. With so many people moving to the area, tensions began to rise as all these new people began seeking new jobs. The Chinese in particular were targets of discrimination. Once the Transcontinental Railroad was complete, many of the Chinese people that had helped to build it sought work. White people in the Washington Territory resented the Chinese, whom they thought were taking jobs away from whites. This sentiment was nationwide, leading Congress to pass the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, preventing Chinese people from immigrating to the U.S. This action only fueled the anti-Chinese sentiment among whites, leading to further discrimination and riots. Funny thing about all of this anti-Chinese sentiment, though, was how much they were needed for the growing economy in Washington, especially working in fishing, canning, farming, and mining, jobs not many white Americans wanted. This sounds familiar. All of this growth, both economic and population, in spite of all of the tensions it was creating, eventually lead the territory of Washington to become the state of Washington. Becoming a state had many advantages. The biggest being that Washingtonians would get a voice in Congress in the other Washington, where they could advocate for laws to be passed that could benefit Pacific Northwesterners. Washington needed 125,000 people to qualify for statehood. The arrival of rail, in particular the Northern Pacific Railroad, helped the population increase greatly. From 1887 to 1889 alone, the population grew by 95,000 people. Now that Washington had enough people, in February of 1889, Congress gave Washington the thumbs up to create a constitution, which they completed in the summer months. Then, November 11th, 1889, Washington became the 42nd state of the Union.
Okay, now that you know how Washington became a state, there's one more thing that I'd like you to do. Go to pages 248 and 249 in the textbook. That's also going to just be a single PDF file in this folder, and it'll just have those 2 pages. Now, these pages review those same industries that you looked at on Tuesday. You have mining, you have fishing, you have timber, and what you're going to see is those industries are going to be impacted greatly by the arrival of rail. And so we saw how socially there is a change in Washington State, or how it sort of like disrupts the social order here. You're also going to see it impact the economy here as well. So I want you to take a look, and for each of those, I want you to tell me in what ways did rail helped change that industry. So for example, with timber, how does the arrival of rail change timber? So for each of those 4 industries, I want you to take note of that. And the last thing I want you to do is there's going to be a discussion post, and I'd like you to go to the discussion post and merely tell me which industry do you think was impacted the most by rail, and then I want you to tell me why you think that is. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today in Washington State history. I hope that you're all staying safe and staying sane, and I hope that I get to see you all very soon.